we have the pleasure of speaking to Lungi Morrison, a granddaughter of the great Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And Lungi's going to tell us a little bit about herself, I hope, and maybe about the wider family, as you have very influential family connections. And I understand that you have an interest in health, and particularly in e-health and some of the new technologies which are emerging. So let's start with asking you about yourself and your family.
Well, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. At any given opportunity, young people of our generation have a duty to continue the legacy, not only of our elders, who might not even be the likes of Desmond, but as you know, in Africa, elders are important. And when elders are leading, we ought to take a leaf out of their book. And so that's my passion, is that I am graciously, humbly a part of a family like the Tutu family. My grandmother and Desmond Tutu are brother and sister, and so her name is Sylvia Tutu, and she married a Morrison, and therefore I become Morrison. Needless to say, I've come into the fold as we established the Tutu Family Foundation, and looking at all of the amazing work that is happening globally, including the project here in the UK with the Ubuntu project and the foundation here in London. And what is special is that when you are out there in the community at the coalface of challenges and growing the new leadership for the future, we need to also see how we can support that. And healthcare, as we all know, is one area of need. And I know I'm jumping the gun, but I think really it's just to share that it's my honor to be able to support any work that's family driven, and that my grandfather has led in many parts of the world. And so e-health is one that's personally interesting because of the advent of this thing that has such significant capabilities. So not only does it connect us to have a conversation when we're far from each other, but it's actually changing lives.
And are mobile phones everywhere in Africa, or is this something that the elites have?
Incidentally, I've just finished a bit of a research paper supporting two professors in the UK, Professor Kitney and Professor Richardson, who are sitting on the board with my grandfather in the background research phase for looking at establishing an e-health project for global community. What I found in this piece of research is not surprising. South Africa has 94% mobile penetration, meaning we have 50 million people, over 45, close to 48 million people in South Africa will have a device. It might not be a smartphone, but they have a device that they can use. And so what we are saying is, if very poorest of the poor may not have food or may not have a job, but through family, people hand down phones, they have a cell phone. Well, we believe that this thing can actually then be used to create a leapfrog effect, meaning we can take people with the MDGs coming up from absolutely dying from ordinary diseases, which is unnecessary, diabetes, heart care conditions, glaucoma. Why would we wait for something to suddenly, why don't we use this technology to be able to support communities? So what we're really saying is, with 94% penetration, let's then identify technology partners who can start to support us to monitor people in outlying areas. Some people have to walk 5 kilometers to the closest hospital. And it's not to say, I have to debunk the myth perhaps, is not to say that communities like South Africa or India are that rural, that everybody is rural. What we're saying is that with urbanization, poor people don't have access, for instance, to transport. So even if they might be in a dwelling, they might have to walk 10 kilometers to the nearest clinic. So we're really saying, with all of these issues, healthcare, education primarily, we believe that it is really time to ensure that we're using technology to the best and create the leapfrog effect, particularly because the Millennium Development Goals are coming up to 2015 hiatus, and 3 of the Millennium Development Goals speak to health.
Okay, let's go back to Lungi. Yeah, tell us about your professional background,
right,
or your studies.
I grew up in exile. I happened to have, part of my family basically were political refugees. So my parents left South Africa when I was 3, and in fact through my grandpa we were supported to have United Nations refugee status. And so lived in many parts of the world until democracy. Lived in Nigeria for 10 years, I lived in Brazil as an American field scholar, my father lived in Canada. And then eventually I went to school and studied in New Zealand, where we also lived for 10 years. And so I've got a master's degree in nothing to do with health, but I suppose we all kind of go around the houses. I had studied anthropology and development studies, and I suppose with the development studies, I've had a keen interest in areas of development, looking at the United Nations, and worked on some study with them in the past, and also brands and how brands evolve. So marketing has been an important part of my trajectory. I worked in brand advertising, did some lecturing in marketing. So then returned to South Africa in 1998 after the elections, and it was really about, how does one, through the global experience and understanding of the struggle and what people in South Africa, like my grandfather and so many ordinary South Africans had sacrificed, those of us who had the opportunity to be schooled in Western society, sort of very good education institutions, go back and give back and contribute and get our hands dirty, not only in rhetoric, but get our hands really dirty in terms of the very important work of, I think when you look at, and I think it's something that my grandfather says, is that we are through each other. And so if you can give back as an individual to a community, you're giving back not only to South Africa, to Southern Africa, to Africa, and the global community. And I think that was the point at which I felt I needed to begin this journey of contributing.
As an African in the diaspora, we're always looking for ways to reconnect with the story, the unfolding story of the development of Africa. What might you say to somebody of your generation who has grown up in the UK, who have grown up in Europe or United States? How do they make that reconnection with what is happening in Africa? You've lived all over the world, so you've clearly made that reconnection. Right,
thank you, and it's very prudent that you asked that, because it's a question that I think, by virtue of what we all experience as Africans in diaspora, we wanting to reconnect with who we are before we are, in kind of in different parts of the world. And I believe that the way that I'd been able to do that, in fact, from a young age, is to constantly to have a mind of inquiry about identity, issues of identity in terms of who I am, what we represent as a community. I think first is, I really believe in a Pan-Africanist guise before you're necessarily only focused on your own kind of population group. I think that if we look at the macro and say Africa on the whole has so much to contribute to the world, and then when you locate with that first, there's quite an important, how can I say, you identify all of the attributes that mean that we are contributors to the global community. So, for instance, the cradle of mankind sits in South Africa. We've got from north to south, east to west, so many points of connection. So if you connect as an African first, you might not be able to trace that you're from Ghana or from South Africa, from Sierra Leone and Ethiopia. But if you connect first as an African, that gives you so much to work with, because then you can say, well, who are the great Africans? And therefore, it gives you impetus to then locate yourself within the whole, and therefore identify ways that you can then contribute.
Lungi, thank you very much. It's been inspiring.
Thank you very much for your time.